Alright, so what we're going to do in this video, really quick, is go over some fundamentals on car setup, what stuff does on the car. We're going to build a base setup at Kentucky. Just will hopefully help you guys be able to adjust the cars a little more, as well as start helping turn out base setups, or whatever you can do, or at least get you a better understanding of what's going on. So already I took the fixed setup for Kentucky and I ran just did like 2 or 3 laps, and it was extremely tight, and I went ahead and recorded telemetry for it, so we'll start with that. What you guys should do is absolutely always start with the esports racing group workbook for right now. It's the easiest one to really work with. So this is kind of just showing you where everything's at on the car right now. Like you can see the splitter, basically these arrows, right? So the blue arrow here, this first blue number, is negative 0.1. That's the lowest point the splitter gets to. If you hover over that, you'll see there's a blue line to the right of the mouse or pointer, and that's actually showing you where that lowest point is, where it's hitting the track. Here's Kentucky is an extremely bumpy track, so it's kind of a good and bad example, because it'll show you kind of where telemetry can be all over the place. That red next arrow here is going to show the highest point, which I don't really care too much for most of the time. And then this yellow diamond here is going to be the average ride heights at 0.9, which helps us kind of determine how high the ride heights are, around the track, basically. Overall, the average. I like to keep this number at about 1 or below. At a track like Kentucky, you might not see it. You might see something really close to 1, or maybe a little above. We usually try to keep it as low as possible. It is what it is. Now, since we really don't want to adjust ride heights or anything like that yet, we'll move in the garage, because there are a bunch of things from the fixed setup that we already know we want to kind of work away from. So if you were really quick to look at the very bottom here, the other thing I want to point out with telemetry is this rear left and rear right ride heights. You can see again the lowest point in the averages, and this dotted line is a saving grace, because it tells you about where you want to be for the rear ride heights at most tracks. So some tracks you're going to see that that is just simply put too low. Chicagoland, for example, you could get it that low, you could get it lower. What we heard was that you might want to be just a little above, off the ground. That's the 4-inch line isn't exactly the ground. And the thing you have to think about when you look at this front left and front right and rear left and rear right is that is from the side skirts. That is not from the splitter or any part of the chassis, like the suspension, anything like that. It is from just the side skirts themselves, and you're not going to get them perfect. By any means. You're not going to go to a 0. Up here on the splitter, the center front splitter ride height is the only one that is actually produced from a sensor. Everything else, like the left splitter and the right splitter, is actually done through math. People have taken a lot of time, created formulas and so on and so forth, looking at images and looking at all kinds of different things to basically be able to calculate, where the splitter's at. And it's not, exact, but it's extremely close, and it is worth looking into, because it saves so much time, rather than just trying to do it from a replay. Because in the replay, you're actually going to have to have the splitter literally hitting the track. This is just such an easy way to get it there, or 90% of the way, really quick. This is a channel that I added, or a page I added. This actually kind of shows, front ride height to rear ride height, and then the splitter rake. So from left side to right side, and it also shows from I believe the left front to the left rear. Basically, this is just a way to see how level the car is in the splitter. This is a way because you don't know for sure that the splitter, ride heights are exact. It's another way to determine basically that the splitter is level just based off of the ride heights themselves. This is just kind of reassuring us that we're doing the right thing. We don't really use that much. But anyway, moving on, we're going to go ahead and start looking at some basic things that we would want to change. And yeah, I got a contact 0x. I just barely touched the wall with the right rear. But going in here, in the garage, the first thing that I see obviously is going to be the tire pressures. and you can see that the right front actually, in just like 3 laps wore 2% more than the right rear. This car is tight, so that makes sense. I don't like these 22s. Basically what we want to do is go up and around 30, and then what we're going to do is move up and down based on feel of the car. If the car needs to be tighter or grippier, what you can do is decrease the split from left to right. So instead of being 15 psi, you can go up to about 10. I wouldn't go any more than or any less than 10. 10 is kind of the max, and that any more is kind of pushing it. I like to stay around 15, and it's kind of moves around for you. But basically, the bigger the split, the looser the car will be, right? So if we're at 22 and that's at 45, when I got the car handling right, and I can already tell you why it's going to be tight right now. It had nothing to do with that. But it would have been extremely loose, but also slow, because those left side tire pressures being so low is not beneficial in any way, shape, or form. Even over the long run, even the guy that created the tire model said to run those low tire pressures, but they just do not work. Looking at the chassis, that's a lot of stuff right there, all at once, kind of in your face. But don't get overwhelmed, because we're going to break it down, pretty easy. So ballast forward, starting out, this is high. 70 is basically throwing all the weight in the front of the car. What the ballast forward does is, broken down really simply, it just moves weight forward and backwards. We don't want ballast forward in this car for the most part. You might go forward just a little bit, but all that's doing is basically going to make the car tighter, and it's also going to burn the right front off throughout a run. So we'll go ahead and move that back over to the bare minimum, which is going to be about 28. This is going to change the static ride heights. So there's a difference between static ride heights and dynamic ride heights. These that you see here right now are your static ride heights. Then what we were looking at in telemetry is you could see the car moved up and down, basically around the racetrack. Is the dynamic ride height. So in the corner, as the car comes under load, the car will drop, and that's what we use springs and shock springs to prevent or allow it to drop a certain amount, so we can get the nose to seal off as well as the rear of the car, which we try to get as low as possible for the aerodynamic benefits. Next thing, looking at the nose weight percentage, all that is basically telling us how much weight is in the front of the car, and it should have dramatically decreased since we decreased the ballast. The cross weight is going to be basically weight. It's a percentage of weight based on corner weights right here, and it's just in crosses. What you'll see is big time. This part of the car, the left rear, is going to affect the right front, and vice versa. And the left front and right rear are kind of tied together. It's kind of like an X, but they work in tandem with each other. So more cross weight, typically, I know in real life, I believe, is what allows the car to turn a little better. In the sim, what we found is more crossweight is tighter. We know a lot of guys are running lower crossweight. We like to run anywhere from, we did sets with 45, and we've done sets near 60. It's kind of personal preference. This is something that you can actually use to adjust the car. So if you get a baseline setup that you think is too loose, you could go up a couple percentage on your crossweight. And if you think it's too tight, you could go down a little bit on the crossweight depending on where it's at. So your limits are about 45% is as low as you can go, and I believe 64 is as high as you can go. To adjust crossweight, what you'll do is actually take the spring perch offset here and go up on the left side here, or the left front, and you do the same thing on the right side of the right front, and then the inside of the right rear, and again outside of the left rear. And what that'll do is you're working in tandem with each part of the car. You want to do it basically the same amount. So if you do like 2 clicks on the left, you want to go the same thing on the right, same thing on the right rear, same thing on the left rear. You're moving in increments to basically move the crossweight. So as you can see, as I go up like that, you have to do a specific pattern to get it to work or go down. Because if you just start clicking at random, it's just not. It's going to go up and down, up and down, up and down, because you're not following the correct pattern. So you see that's moving the crossweight down, so we're down to 54 now. Now if I wanted to move it back up, I would just go the opposite way and click on the inside, on the top, and the outside on the bottom, and that'll move the crossweight. So 55 is kind of high, we're going to go ahead and move it down. It should be kind of freer since we moved that ballast out, so it should help it turn. So I'm just going to go to about 53 here to start out. Another thing here is ride heights are going to be affected by this preload thing. Right now, just uncheck it while we're changing the ride heights, because as you can see, it just dropped our cross weight dramatically. Because what this does is when it starts getting engaged, like when your link slack goes to a negative number, what it does is starts adding preload. That'll help basically keep the car planted, like it'll keep the left side on the ground, and it can help create a little more roll. It also adds more dynamic cross weight. So in corner entry and corner exit, you can actually make the car a little tighter by adding some preload. Typically we don't run this, we're kind of experimenting with some stuff. This is, there's no wrong way to build a setup, so you can try this stuff. Just knowing what it does will help you a little bit. Typically right now what you're going to want to do is just keep that at 0 while we get everything settled. So we're getting a good base build here. So now we're at 52, so I've just got to take the cross weight up. And as you can see, now we're at 53. Cool. So what I typically do is drop the ride heights. This is one of the first things we work on, the ride heights down to the bare minimum. So I'm going to take the left side down to, you want to move in tandem again. You don't want to do one side all at once, because basically if you drop the left front all the way down, not only is your cross weight going to be messed up, but your right front's going to be jacked up. And so when you try to bring the right front down, you're going to bring the left front down, because the right front can affect the left front. As you saw, the left front dropped as I dropped the right front. So you just kind of keep moving them together until you get everything right where you want it. So see how it's blinking yellow? We are, pretty much there. You're never going to get all 4 blinking yellow. If you do, it's not impossible. It's just, as long as you get close, it's really all that matters. So as you saw, I just dropped the 545 and it's too low here. Now that's okay, because if I go down, I told you the right rear is kind of connected to the left front. If I bring the right rear down, it's going to bring the left front up. And we're at 4.531. Now we're going to move the left rear and the right rear in tandem, both down, to get them as low as possible. So the point of this is to get the static ride heights as low as possible. Because once we do that, it just makes doing the dynamic ride heights a little easier, because we know we're as low as possible statically. So the difference between static ride heights and again dynamic is static is going to be what this car is sitting on pit road. On pit road, it's going to be sitting at these ride heights because it's not under load. When it's under load, that's going to be your dynamic ride heights. That's going to be what it's doing as you're going through the corner. With aero, like the winds and whatnot, on the car, pushing the car down, that kind of stuff, as the weight transfers as you go through a corner, so on and so forth. As you can see, we got the car all the way down. It's pretty low. I don't care to get it, perfect, because every time you try to get it, perfect, you're going to end up with something failing, and you're going to spend 30 minutes trying to get something when you're already close enough. As you can see, my cross weight's about where I want it, still about 53, so we're right there. Not too concerned. Let's talk about springs. So basically what a spring will do is compress and decompress, I guess would be the correct terminology, right? So when you go in a corner, if you have a softer spring, like a 400 to 500 pound spring, it's going to drop more and allow the front end to travel more towards the ground. If you have a 2,000 pound spring, for instance, is a stiffer spring, it's not going to travel as much. So what you're going to find is the car can't get as low to the ground. Typically, we don't have to mess around with the front springs too much because the ride height limits in these cars. So in the Cup cars, you can go as low as 2 inches for your static ride heights. So technically, you can run really, really stiff springs. 2,000 pound springs are the max that you can do inside the Xfinity cars, as to where you have like 7,000 pound or something. I think it might actually be 10,000 pound springs you can do in the Cup cars. So you can get your static ride heights to the point that you're on the ground and then run extremely stiff springs so the car doesn't move. So your overall ride heights, your average ride heights, stay pretty consistent. We can't do that in this car. We rely a lot on travel, but we still need to keep the car as low as possible all the time. The only thing with a softer spring is that as it comes down, the softer the spring is, the more it can come down. To get lower to the ground, it's also going to come up just as much. So as we look at the springs here, 500 to 500 is not bad. What we're going to look at though is the track surface is pretty bumpy here, so we want to run as soft as possible pretty much to allow the car to work with the track. Basically, if you have a really smooth track, like newly paved, no bumps, that kind of stuff, you can run stiffer springs. Stiffer springs won't come up as much in the straightaways, so you'll actually be a little more consistent in the straightaways at the ride heights, which will help you and can generate more speed, especially down the straightaways. Here, that doesn't really matter too much, and we're going to want more mechanical grip. By mechanical grip, I mean softer spring, which is basically going to allow the car to come down more. It's going to keep more weight on the tire, which will keep the tire planted through the corner a little better, which will help you get grip, essentially. That's one way to put it. So we're going to drop that to 400. My ride height's going to drop, and I'm going to put it back up to where I want it, right at the bare minimum. Cool. So now I'm going to do the same thing to the right side. And you only want to adjust one side at a time. If you were to do both at the same time, you're going to be going back and forth, clicking for hours. Cool. So now this one is actually really low, and the only thing that's high is my left rear. Technically, or usually, I don't like this big difference from left rear to right rear, because what you'll see is in Motec sometimes you can tell that the left rear is higher than the right rear in the corner, and they're already super close. And what that'll do is basically, if your left side is higher than your right side in a corner, your left side is coming up, which is going to make the car entirely push to the right, which will make it super tight and want to plow, especially on exit. So the goal is to keep the left side as low and lower than the right side as possible the entire time. So now that we've covered some springs, let's look at the shock springs. So we said we wanted to run softer springs because of the track surface here, and just to generate as much speed as possible. Typically, we're alright running pretty much 400s everywhere we go. The shock springs here is basically a bump stop. So bump stops were basically it's like a piece of rubber, so that when the car comes down a certain point, it's like on a shock. It will hit the bump stop, and the bump stop will prevent the car from bottoming out. So we run bare minimum springs, which will allow the car to come all the way down, and then we use the shock springs in the packer to basically stop the car from hitting the ground where we want it to. Typically, at most tracks, we'll run almost max because you have to, just to keep the car as fast as possible and the ride height as consistent as possible. At a track like this that is so bumpy, what we'll do is go ahead and start at about 3,500 because that is a softer number. So the max on the shock springs here is going to be about 7,000. And then the packer. So what the packer does is tells you basically when the shock spring will be engaged. So the shock spring is a little spring basically that sits. I can't tell you exactly where it sits. You would have to actually, if you look up in the Commodore's garage, I know he has a lot of good information, but the shock spring, when it's engaged, is based on the packer. So it sits in like a 4-inch shock or a spring, I believe, and when it's engaged is based on the packer, because if you go up in the packer, like you run a higher number. So say we are hitting the track a little bit, we're going too low, then I'm going to increase the packer, which will tell it to engage the shock spring at a sooner time. And you'll see this in telemetry. So we'll go up on the packer and it will engage the shock spring, and right on the shock spring maybe a little more. And there are ways to tell when the shock spring is engaging and disengaging. Typically what we can do is go ahead and start like we'll start, because we drop the springs and we drop the shock springs, we'll start at like a higher number here, just so we can see if it's on the ground when we start here. For bump stiffness and rebound stiffness, those are shocks. Basically there's two parts to a shock. And it's two sides basically split by a disc, and the disc has different holes in it that allow for different stiffnesses for each, I believe. So what I read. When you're building a base, it's not terrible to start out at 32, 32, 32, 32 all the way around pretty much. The only exception would be the the left rear. We usually drop the rebound down to allow the left rear to sit down a little more in the corner. What this will do is basically what the shocks will do is basically determine how much weight is coming on and off that corner at any given time. You can kind of affect the handling a lot based on that. So what we'll do is run 32 and 5, and then we'll do 32, 32 on the rear again. Cool, so now we have gone through a lot so far. Brake bias, technically, I like to just kind of throw down a 62 as of lately. Brandon Burkhardt has said, basically, if you run less brake bias, it will engage the calipers less while you're running around the track, because they're always kind of compressed, and the more percentage you have towards the front, the more they're kind of just engaged and maybe slightly scraping, or there's more pressure there as you're going around. So you want to run as little as possible that you can get away with without hurting yourself if you have to get on the brakes. A lot of cars, like if you're losing straightaway speed, he said if you lower the brake bias, usually you can make up for that straightaway speed loss because you're not losing much speed down the straights then. I'm kind of rambling because I've been awake for not that long, but long enough. Anyway, let's look at the left front camber. I keep kind of skipping around. Before I do the left front camber, the only other thing I wanted to hit on was tape, steering ratio, and steering offset. I just need to finish up here. So steering ratio, I typically run a higher one just because it helps with tire wear. Steering offset is personal preference. Basically how much you need to turn the wheel to the left, or if you need to, basically where you want the wheel to align it so that it's going straight down the straightaways. Brake bias you already know about. Tape configuration, we usually try to push it 60, 65. Basically you just need to go run laps and find how far you can go without blinking, or even if you're blinking, that's alright. So moving on down to camber. Left side, left front, what we've started to find is the left front you can kind of max out. What you'll see is the left front never wears. So being aggressive on the camber is only trying to help it, and what we found kind of at Chicago from a lot of testing was that basically it kind of helped the right front to be higher. You might have to play with it. It might be that there are some tracks that might pay off a little more to run a little less left front camber. There were some weeks that we were extremely good in the long run that we weren't running that much left front camber. So looking at that, I changed that. It bumped the right height up, and I had to drop it down again with the spring purge. So casters, this is kind of how far the wheel is leaned forward in reverse, I believe. Basically a bigger split from left to right will help the car turn in on corner entry, I believe. We were running these kind of maxed out, and now we're kind of experimenting, so it's kind of up to you as to how much you want to play with those. As far as the toe in, I like to just basically try to keep this, as of now, we're trying to keep it at about +1 and -1 left to right. So now we are pretty much done with the left front. So toe in can also affect handling of the car. It can affect tire wear. I posted a little cheat sheet that I really recommend consulting on the toe end, and the caster, and even camber, all this stuff. There's a lot of good information in it. Moving on to the right front, you can see we have 965 pounds on the right front. It's just sitting there. Got that 400-pound spring that we want. The right height's pretty low. Got the shock spring that we want. We're going to start there with the packer. Bump stiffness and rebound stiffness is already maxed out. We want to start at about 4 degrees of camber. I would start at 4 and then kind of play around with what you can find. 'Cause you can kind of go up and you can kind of go down. It's just going to be whatever the tire likes the most over a run, how much you can get away with abusing your tire without completely killing it. Again, we're going to run probably almost max on the right side as far as caster is concerned, and then the -1. So we're already done with the right front. So let's look at the left rear. The bigger the spring split from left to right, the looser the car is going to be, right? So if I were to bring this down to 400 and 375 and we had a 25-pound spring split, the car is going to be stupid tight. A lot of times you'll see a really small spring split if the cross weight is extremely low. Our cross weight is pretty high, or medium, a medium ground, so we're going to stay, I would say maybe a 350 on the left rear to start with, and we'll try to get the rear end down a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and go with a 6, let's do a 700 to start out with. Cool. So now we got a good base. So let's look at the bump stiffness and rebound on the left. Like I said, we're going to do 32 and 5 or 32 and 0, kind of wherever you want to be on that, but we're trying to get the left rear down as much as possible. Again, we want to keep that left side lower than the right side. So we're going to move the toes. We want to try to max those out on the rear. And what this will do is help create more skew in the car, which will basically help the thing over the long run, tire wear wise. You can pretty much max out the rear cambers because that's all you can get out of it is 2 degrees, and you want that. I mean, you're running 6 on the left to 4 on the right front. You're obviously not getting as much as you could in the rear. And I know Brandon will say there's no camber in the rear of a car in a real race car, but this is what we have. So Typically with the track bar, we run about a 4-inch split, and that 4-inch split is what helps give us this +6, -6, because if I take this up to, see, 9, you see it goes to 5 and it stops flashing. This is basically to help again with that skew. Again, I'm at 3-inch split and it's still not flashing. And then there's a 4-inch split and you'll see that now it's flashing. And if I were to play with the right heights, I could probably get that -6 back. There it is. What we'll see here is that the front end started failing, and I had to bring it back up, but the truck arm preload did that for me. So what the truck arm preload is, it's pretty much useless. So you can go negative and it can free or tighten up the car, or you can go positive. If it does, it's kind of weird how it works. You can kind of read into it on the, I believe, the Commodore's Garage, but also that little cheat sheet. Basically, the goal with this thing for us is just try to keep it as close to 0 as possible, because it does not really benefit us half the time. So you see we got that -5, +5. What we can do here is also kind of just extend the split just a little bit. So we'll do 4.5 inches, because sometimes that's what we have to do to get the -6, +6. Typically, it's alright as long as you got it flashing yellow. You're getting as much as you can out of it. That's fine. So we'll stick with the 4-inch split right now. So again, try to keep the truck arm preload as close to 0 as possible, and then this 370 gear is fine for right now. We can experiment if it'll let us change. Sometimes it will. So if I were to go, try to go to like a 375, it might take it. It did not. If I try to go to a 364, it did take it. So we do have an option here. The only way you're going to find out is if you try it. So now we'll go back up here. You see the front ARB, which is anti-roll bar or the sway bar. I'm going to attach it again. Basically, when you make any kind of ride height changes, you just want to unattach it, and then go ahead and attach it again when you're finished. You know, so now it hasn't affected our ride heights. Our cross weight's pretty close to where we wanted it. It's a little lower, but that's all right. We're also going to increase our tape up really quick up to about 65. We'll go ahead and start there. Let's start with the sway bar here, the diameter. So the lower the number, the later this will interact with the car. It's basically delaying how soon this part of the car does what it's supposed to do, as I understand it. Basically, a lower bar can help free the car up, but it's not much of an adjustment sometimes. Typically, right now, we usually run a pretty stiff bar, especially when you're running arm asymmetry. What this arm asymmetry does is basically helps winch the left side ride heights down. It can also create left roll. Based on the banking of the track that you're at, you don't want to run too much. So if you're running at a track like Chicagoland, technically what we kind of were talking about was maybe if you're going to run it, you want to run anywhere from minimum to about 3, and maybe 4, 5, and max might be too high. It's just kind of a fine-tuning thing. So if you want the left side down a little more, like if you're having trouble keeping the left side or the left front down over a run or whatever, you know, try adding a little more. If you're a little tight and you have that ability to assist the left front, you know, while you're doing it by keeping the left front down and helping create that roll, you know, use a little more arm asymmetry, but just remember it is going to affect your ride heights. Link slack. So we kind of talked about this before. If you go in the negatives, it's going to give you negative preload, which is going to affect your ride heights. It's going to bring your left side down, as you can see it did, and your right side up. As this was at 4.5, now it's at 4.6, and this is almost at 7.1. So again, we'll start with this at 0. If you go into the negatives with that positive preload, or that negative preload, I'm sorry, it can create a more dynamic cross weight. So instead of this 52.6, you might see a bigger amount of cross weight overrun. Like, you're not going to actually see the number, but you're going to experience it in the car. You might feel that it's a little tighter in or tighter off, and that's alright because I can create mechanical grip, but it can also be non-beneficial. So use that as you will. Right now we play with it. We've ran it at Auto Club, and we've ran without it at Auto Club in the past. We've used it a couple places. It's just really personal preference and what we come down to when we're fine-tuning the setup. So again, this is a base setup. We just completely pretty much built one from scratch that is not terribly far off what you would see us running at any kind of track, aside from the bumps and rebounds being you know, kind of just all maxed out. Aside from the left rear, this is a pretty close base. One thing I know I didn't touch is truck arm mounts. Basically, these can, at the bottom, they're making the car tight, center in, or turn in and turn off. Technically, we just don't really touch these though. They don't really do a whole lot with the car. Sometimes you might see us raise the right rear. Basically, everything you see in the garage you can play with, and what you find from when you're testing, you can take to other tracks. Like, things change over builds, so they might become a big thing in a future build, or they might be, kind of helpful now. I found personally at Chicagoland when I was testing, and the several thousand laps I put in, that I kind of actually liked the right rear truck arm mount being high, which actually helped the car turn on exit. It seemed like in that little manual that I posted. That little booklet actually confirmed that I was right on that. It should help the car rotate on exit, I do believe. So looking at this is good. We're going to go turn a couple laps and then look at the telemetry and kind of see where the car is at. And that'll give us a good idea of exactly where we're at as far as this base and it being ready to be dispersed to members of the team or so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and run a couple laps. Help if I get out of second gear there. I can already tell you this thing wants to turn dramatically better than it did before. Now I'm just going to be noticing like what the car is doing, because I can make adjustments based on how it feels and what it looks like it's doing, as well as looking at the ride heights here. Using a lot less brake than I was before, and the car is just turning so much better. Now that we don't have that ballast, it's a huge thing in it. See, I'm actually a little loose off now. It's been a long time since I've been in Kentucky, so I'm sure I'm off on the line a little bit, but that's alright. And on my second lap, I just picked up half a second on my best lap that I ran earlier, and you can actually pick up more time over the next few laps, maybe a lap or two. So you can see that's a huge change in just 10 minutes that I was in the garage there, which is pretty awesome. So let's go ahead and take a look at the ride heights. So I'm going to go in. So you can see, pull it up here. Looking at the ride heights now, so the left front is 0.4 in the air and has an average ride height of 1.6. The right front is 0.3 and it has an average ride height of 1.3. So we are in the air a decent amount. So we can do really quick, we'll take a look at the rear too while we're at it. 505 and 490 is the lowest. You can see it looks like it's in the air most of the time. It's quite a bit up from that forward line, so we have a full inch about of room that we can go down. That will help this car with a little bit of speed. So we'll go ahead and head back into the sim and we'll make some changes here. So again, I said that we were 0.4 high on the left side, so we'll go ahead and drop this to about 3. And what I'm looking at here is I was at 1.7. You can say if you're about 0.4, I like to subtract 0.4 from where I was on the Packer, and it puts me pretty close. It might be wrong, it might be off, but you can always adjust once you do the next run. And then on the right side, I said we were 0.3 high, so we're just going to drop this to about 1.7. We'll do 750. That's fine. So this should be pretty close. And then we'll look at the rear of the car. I said we were. The rear left is actually higher than the rear right the entire time, so I don't like that. Pretty much the entire time, and the rear left is at 505 and the rear right is at 490. So what we can do is go ahead and drop this to about 300 here, and we'll stay at that right now just because we need to get the right rear a little higher. And the way we might go about that is maybe using some preload or just jacking these right side static right heights up. We're not. That's something that's kind of I just started doing, just kind of seeing how it goes. It may not be the right answer. There's other ways to go about it, I think, but just something to kind of look at and try. I mean, you can really experiment here. The bigger the right rear spring, the higher this is going to be throughout the corner, and so you can kind of match that left rear ride height to the corner. But typically, we want to run as low as possible without hitting the track and without affecting handling or without it slowing us down, because that's where you'll find a lot of speed. Now you can get pretty low, and then you could be damn near hitting the track, and the car actually starts driving incorrectly or it starts slowing down. Is what we heard some people saying in like Chicagoland. They couldn't get as low as they could at Texas in the rear of the car. That's all right. It doesn't have to be on the ground. So we are still high though. So there are ways we'll go around, trying to get that rear end down a little bit. It's probably going to be raising the right side static ride heights a bit, and then running a smaller right rear spring. This car should be looser because I just increased that split from left to rear on the rear springs by decreasing that left rear spring and trying to get it a little lower to the ground. But we can run pretty soft springs with this higher cross weight because we want to get the rear end down, and because it's if we were to run a really small spring in the right rear, we have to run almost bare minimum springs in the left rear to compensate for it. And you see at my first lap, I'm already just as fast as my previous run, and wasn't that fast before on my first lap. So also might have just been a little bit of line improvement, but this should also improve the handling a little bit with it being a little lower to the ground. I can see us hitting the track there a little bit going in. It's bouncing quite a bit, but this is why we're not running the 7,000 pound shock springs that we might run elsewhere, because this track here is just so bumpy. And there's about 3/10 on my best lap. So again, now we're at 0.8 of a second faster than my best lap in the fixed earlier. Now I could have ran faster if I'd have spent more time working on the line, but just got a baseline established and then went and worked on the car. Definitely adding that tape definitely helped. So let's go ahead and take another look at the telemetry and see where we're at. Cool, so now I show negative 0.1. If I hover over that, you see it's going through turns 1 and 2. It's pretty low, and then same thing on the right side. You can see through 3 and 4 it's actually hitting. So we are pretty low. Our average ride height is 0.6 and 0.7, so that's actually pretty good, especially with the shock springs that we have. So, and we look at the rear of the car really quick, and we are at 4.63 and 4.65. That's not bad. That's not terrible. We can actually work with that. So what we're going to go ahead and do, it is okay to hit the ground a little bit. So if you are, scraping and it's helping you grip, that's fine. And in this case, it felt like it kind of was. But again, this track is extremely bumpy. So if we're hitting the ground now, as the fuel burns off, this 4.63 and 4.65 is going to become, closer to 5. And when it comes closer to 5, I already showed you how if you make a change in the right rear of the car, it's going to affect the left front. As that right rear comes up, that left front is going to come down and get hitting the track even more. So we can't have it that low to the ground. So we're going to go ahead, go back into the sim. We're going to make a really quick change. We're just going to go ahead and bump this up a little bit on both sides on the Packer. And that should put us right about where we want, ride height wise. So we're pretty close. You could go maybe another click on each side if you're still, too high, or I'm sorry, too low. That's fine. You could also increase your shock springs. Like I just went up. I don't know that Packer would be enough, so we'll go up a little bit more on the shock springs because of stiffer shock springs. By increasing the Packer, we're engaging the shock spring sooner, and if we engage a stiffer shock spring sooner than we were engaging a softer shock spring, that will also help benefit and keep us up a little bit. So this should actually be probably my best run as far as lap times go, not only because I've gotten the line down a little bit more, but this shouldn't be hitting the track as much. roll there, and yeah, I'm already picking up time on it. I'm gonna lose it kind of off the corner, so I'm afraid to get too hard in the throttle because I know it's loose off a little bit, but. Yeah, that loose off right there really just cost me some time coming to the line here, so this lap will actually probably be a little bit slower because I'm already off the pace. And again, I think hitting the track a little bit there was actually helping the car grip. The only issue is that over the run, again, that front end's going to come down more, so it's going to hurt it. And it's alright to lose a little bit of time as long as you're you're going to benefit from it in the long run here. We're still pretty close, if not better here. Yeah. There it is. Now, when you start getting to this point where I think the ride heights are alright, they're pretty close. I can look at them really quick, but I know they're not hitting and they're pretty low. My average ride heights should be also pretty low. I hit the best lap that I've hit in the entire session. This is where I'll start moving into maybe 5, 10, or 20 lap runs and start working on fine-tuning. You'll want to start fine-tuning those shocks and the bumps and rebounds, the shocks on the car to affect the handling, as well as tire wear. You're going to want to start doing tire runs and see what you can do to make the car a little better. So real quick, we'll talk about some basic adjustments we might do here. So if the splitter is not consistent enough, like if you want these average ride heights to be a little lower and you can't get them, something you can do is run lower bump stiffness and max rebound stiffness in the front. That'll help the splitter snap back up. Basically, when you have that rebound stiffness in the front at max, when the car goes down and compresses on the shock, it will snap back up really quick, is what it's supposed to do with that higher number. So it should do the opposite if you run a lower number. Basically, you can use these to help fine-tune the ride heights, as well as weight transfer and that kind of stuff. My advice on tuning these is literally just play with them. Make a change and then go see what it does. You could change both at the same time, or you could just work on I work on one corner of the car first. You might drop the bump stiffness down to like 10. Do a huge change. Take it to 0. See what it does. Run a lap or 2 or 5, and you'll figure it out. There are a lot of changes that you'll make in the garage that you will not see an effect for the first 5 laps. You're not going to see it until later in the run. As the run goes on, it starts affecting the car more and more and more. The other thing to keep in mind when you are working in the garage, don't make more than one change at a time. So I could say this thing's kind of loose off. I could go add about 32 ballast, and I could drop the track bars a little bit on both sides, and I could do this and I could do that, and that's just not going to work out, because if it does work, you're never going to know which part helped. It might be too tight at that point. You don't know which one to go back on because you don't know which one was actually most beneficial. Like a recent example of that for me personally was the truck arm mount on the right rear. I raised that and I felt pretty good about it, but I had also made some kind of track bar change, and I'd done something else with a spring, and I'd done something else with ballast, and I had all these changes and was just throwing everything in the book at it. And I think the truck arm mount was actually what was most beneficial when I broke it down and started doing things individually. This is a huge thing in the garage, and sometimes you get in a rush or you start thinking about what's going to do what. Something to keep in mind is if you run a bigger right front spring than you do a left front spring, it might heat up the tire more. Basically, it might wear more over a run, is what I've found. It kind of depends on the track and the banking and so on and so forth. It's basically handling the weight. Your cross weight up here will affect your corner weights, so as your cross weight changes and your ride heights change and so on and so forth, your corner weights will change, which is how much weight is on that corner at that moment. The other thing you need to think about is, as you come off throttle and start braking, the front of the car comes down, weight moves forward, so that weight from the rear might come forward, whether it's across or just directly forward. Let's see, as far as adjustments go, you can raise cross weight again if you get loose or tight, and you can lower it if you're tight. Again, play with the bumps and rebounds. That rear springs you can use to fine-tune ride heights as well as handling. Track bars, if you're going to move a track bar when you have this 4-inch split, you need to move them in in increments with each other. So you need to, if you go up a 1/4 inch in the left rear, you need to do the same thing in the right rear. The reason being is if you only change one, you're actually making multiple adjustments. You're changing the roll stiffness as well as how the car is gonna drive on corner entry. The roll stiffness is based on the track bars in the rear of the car. There is an in-depth article in the Commodore's Garage, if you were to look in the track bars area, I believe, that explains, or actually it's on roll stiffness, explains this on the rear of the car. It is very in-depth, and I mean, what it comes down to is kind of terminology, but just for the most part what we found is definitely keep that track bar split about the same when you're making adjustments. A lot of this is trial and error, as myself, Chris, and even Brandon, as far as the sim goes, we're still learning. Ian and Roger have done this for a while, and they, sometimes they struggle as well. It's a lot of the guys I talk to, they just have to go play with stuff. They go test stuff, and that's how they find answers. That is how I ever, find anything. Either ask questions, watch videos, read articles, and then go test. I know not everybody has the time to do that, and I'm fortunate enough to, but I'm hoping this video helps you guys learn a little bit about what's going on with the car and how to work on it. As you can see now, my little run, my tire wear is significantly better than it was when we started out, when I was like 3% worse on the right front than I was the right rear. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and save this setup and go ahead and post this video for you guys, and I hope it helps moving forward, ease the struggle. I hope we can help each other make adjustments on the setups as well as the bases themselves. So good luck, and if you have questions, feel free to ask at any point in time. Shoot me messages. I'm kind of on a weird sleeping schedule at the moment, but that's alright.